Let's just jump right into this explainer, because today we are breaking down exactly why crossing the ultimate American financial finish line kind of feels like a total disappointment right now. Seriously, if you've ever daydreamed about hitting that magical seven-figure net worth, you're absolutely going to want to pay close attention to the math and the psychology we're about to unpack.
Okay, so picture this. Our guy, John, just hit a $1 million net worth after 30 solid years of saving. So why is his wife Kara's only reaction to ask if he remembered to take the chicken out of the freezer? Think about it. 30 years of grinding for this one exact moment, and it finally arrives, completely indistinguishable from every other Tuesday. There are no fireworks, no champagne, no exclusive black cards sliding across the mahogany table. It's just two people in their 50s standing in a kitchen with laminate countertops. You see, the finish line moved, but nobody bothered to tell John. That whole pop culture image of a millionaire with a yacht and a private island, yeah, that's a pure fantasy straight from our grandparents' era. For about a century, the word millionaire was the absolute pinnacle of success. Your grandparents heard that word and pictured a completely different species of human being. But the reality today is that unremarkable Tuesday in the kitchen. The number simply stopped meaning what the picture means a really long time ago. In fact, when you survey Americans today, they say it actually takes $2.3 million to be considered wealthy. $2.3 million. That's the current going rate on the fantasy, and it's literally more than double the number John just hit. Basically, someone quietly relocated the trophy. The culture moved the finish line decades ago and just forgot to send John the memo. So let's talk about the mechanical reality, or how math ruins the fantasy. What does $1 million actually functionally do for you in the modern world? Well, the big culprit here is inflation. To put this into perspective, $1 million in 2026 only buys what roughly $514,000 bought in the year 2000, and back in 1980, an astonishingly low $246,000. So when people talk about millionaires like they're royalty, they're clinging to a word from a time when $1 million could buy like 4 times what it buys right now. The word didn't change, but the math underneath it absolutely did. To really understand what $1 million functionally does when you finally stop working, we use the classic 4% rule. It's the standard formula for turning a pile of money into a safe, reliable income stream. Historically, if you withdraw 4% of your portfolio in year one and just adjust for inflation after that, you have a highly probable chance of not running out of cash over a 30-year retirement. But here's the kicker. 4% of $1 million means John's massive lifelong milestone produces just $40,000 a year. 40 grand. That is the totally unremarkable salary of a mid-career manager. It means you still have to check the grocery bill before tapping your card, right? You still have to sit down and decide if you can actually afford to visit the grandkids once or twice this year. The anxiety doesn't magically vanish. It just shifts from, will I ever have enough, to, please don't let me lose what I've built.
Next up, let's dive into locked vaults and silent partners, because honestly, it gets way more brutal.
See, that 40 grand income isn't landing in a vacuum. Being a millionaire on paper and having $1 million to spend are two entirely different universes. One of the largest expenses waiting for an aging couple like John and Kara is an estimated $345,000 healthcare bill. And get this, that doesn't even include long-term care. So a huge chunk of that million is spoken for before they even get to touch it. The million was never fully theirs to begin with. It came with a massive, unavoidable biological bill attached. Plus, for the typical American, the vast majority of their net worth is locked up tight inside the equity of the house they live in. If you look at the median American household, stripping out the roof over their heads drops their net worth from around $193,000 down to just $58,000. Your home equity is basically a gold mine that you aren't allowed to enter. I mean, if you sell the house, you still have to pay to live somewhere else, right? Oh, and don't forget your pre-tax retirement account has a silent business partner. Yep, the government. They step in with the required minimum distribution at age 73, forcing you to pull out roughly $37,700 a year just so they can take their cut. They never showed up to a single meeting, they never put in a single dollar, but they get to drag your money out into the daylight and tax it, ready or not. So realistically, $1 million balance might only be worth around $700,000 in actual spendable dollars. All right, moving on to the millionaire next door, John versus Todd. Let's look at who actually reaches this milestone. We really have to rearrange our mental picture of wealth here. Research shows this stark contrast. Actual millionaires, like John, work regular jobs. They're teachers, accountants, middle managers, and they drive old sedans until the wheels fall off. Meanwhile, his neighbor, Todd looks 10 times richer with his leased German SUV and his financed boat. But Todd is likely one slow month away from his entire financial life coming down like a giant Jenga tower. The people who look rich and the people who actually are rich are very rarely the same people.
Getting there is a brutal grind. It's saving a chunk of every single paycheck into boring index funds for decades. As the legendary investor Charlie Munger once said, pushing that initial $100,000 boulder up the hill is an absolute nightmare. At the beginning, your money grows almost entirely just because you keep shoveling cash into it. Sadly, most people just quit while they're still pushing. But John's secret? It wasn't picking winning stocks. He succeeded by doing absolutely nothing, on purpose for 30 straight years. While the average investor panicked, sold at the market bottom, piled back in at the top, and totally sabotaged their own accounts, John was just the most patient, least interesting guy at the party. And it worked. Now, let's talk about the moving goalpost and the psychology of wealth. Because even when you do everything right, crossing the finish line rarely feels the way you expected it to. Make no mistake, reaching $1 million is an incredible achievement. But, as we've seen, it isn't some massive dynasty for your grandkids. Once you subtract taxes, that huge healthcare bill, and 30 years of living expenses, it barely covers one generation. It leaves you with a paid-off house and a nice, comfortable spot in the top 10 to 15% of households. But cracking the top 1%, that requires growing that money 10 times over. And here is where it gets absolutely wild. Despite crossing this massive finish line, only an astonishing 8% of people with $1 million in investable assets actually call themselves wealthy. 8%. The vast majority still consider themselves middle class. The very people who have crossed the finish line are standing there telling us it doesn't feel like crossing anything at all. Why is that? Well, the human brain is basically a treadmill where your sense of enough is never a fixed point. Whether you make $40,000 or $100,000, the second you hit your target, it becomes your new floor, and your eyes drift right up to the next number. The goalpost isn't at the end of the field, guys. It is literally attached to your forehead, and it moves every single time you do. Which brings us right back to John, standing in his driveway, watching his neighbor wrestle with a boat he couldn't actually afford. John finally realized that the wealth he spent 30 years chasing really had arrived, just without the fireworks. It was the quiet freedom of a paid-off driveway, an income for life, and never having to do terrifying financial math in the middle of the night. It looked like nothing, and nothing is a whole lot more than most people get. So, I'll leave you with this final thought as you examine the treadmill you're currently running on. If the number itself doesn't provide the relief or the fireworks you expect, are you just chasing a number, or are you chasing a feeling that is permanently sold out? Take a moment to really think about what wealth actually means for you. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I hope it helps you find your own quiet freedom.